we have a new middleweight champion. 9 new champions, by the way, in 2022 in the UFC. This would now be obviously adding to that list. All right, so Alex Pereira wins 5th round stoppage, despite the fact that the champion was up it's now a bad habit. The former champion was up on 39-37 on all 3 judges' scorecards heading into the 5th. Aaron, if I had to ask you what the single biggest determining factor of Pereira's success in that fight, what is it?
Well, I think Israel kind of spelled it out. Israel's leg was horribly compromised. I mean, he said that the calf kicks over the course of the fight took their toll, and that'll stifle his mobility. That'll make it also something that he has to really think about. If you're starting to move and your leg is unable to hold your body weight, those are the kind of things that will put you in a position where you're stationary, and that's not where Israel wants to be. He was up against the cage, and Alex Pereira, the commentary team always does a good job, but in this particular case, them continuously pointing out that the guy hasn't fought 5 rounds, I think is erroneous. And listen, in MMA, that is 100% true. But him going 5 rounds in back-to-back fights against Artem Vakitov, which were just volume striking, you could see that his power would carry for the duration of the fight. This guy's got, in my opinion, he's the most credentialed striker we've ever seen in MMA. If you look at what he did in Glory, becoming a 2-division champion, this guy is so dangerous all the time. And he put in the legwork, no pun intended, early on in that fight to take away the balance of Israel. And that's, I think, was the X factor down the stretch.
Aaron, Izzy was up 3-1 entering that 5th round. Before having this information, which obviously seems to be huge, the effect of the calf strikes, without having it after the fight, I was critical of, let's say, we talked about would the lack of experience in Pereira cost him in MMA. I argued that Izzy seemed to make a mistake that set up that finish that was out of character, that he had too much experience to do that. But we find out he feels like he couldn't have shot for a takedown, and he certainly didn't have the mobility with that. So knowing that, do you look at this as, more a result of Pereira's just so poised and he never went away? Or do you look at Adesanya being in the lead there and put a large percentage on what he didn't do that allowed this to happen?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I don't think it's one or the other. The thing about Alex Pereira is his striking is so good that at any point in that time, if he finds one little opening, that's all it would take. And if you looked at the live odds going into the final round, Israel was a 13-1 favorite. I think that anybody looking at that kind of a line needs to know that Alex Pereira is not going to go away here. His corner inspired him in between rounds. He knew that he needed to get a finish in that round. I'm sure that the level of urgency in his corner told him that. And I don't think that you can really take too much away from Israel because he fought brilliantly up until that 5th round. He really did. He lost that 2nd round, but it was still a relatively close round. It's not like Israel ran away with it. Alex rather ran away with it in the 2nd. So, I hate to take anything away from Israel other than the fact that maybe next time around he's going to have to be a little bit more careful with his defense in terms of lower body. But otherwise, if you look at him going into, how he fought up until that point, fought really, really well. So that's why I think a rematch is just something that we have to see next. It was such a dynamic fight, and the tempo changed and the tone changed so quickly that I think that has to be next, unless, of course, Israel is badly hurt, which he kind of alluded to after the fight in his press conference, that there were some health problems going on behind the scenes that he never talks about. So whether or not that's long-term lingering, who knows?
Yeah, you're not a doctor, and he gave us very limited information, but he was somewhat comparing, I guess, what he's feeling to the late actor Chadwick Boseman, who, had fallen into, what did he have cancer? I'm trying to catch up with my mind quickly.
Yes.
Didn't reveal it, fought through, made some final films, and unfortunately passed. That seems a pretty huge comparison for Izzy to make. And he was also referencing people making fun of him, which I'm assuming is the left nipple, and saying, I've got some legitimate health concerns afterwards that I got to go back and fix. Like, armchair quarterbacking without a medical degree, what does that actually mean? Because that's a pretty large reveal after, his first middleweight title loss after such an incredible run. I mean, are we concerned here? Let's just talk openly here. What does that mean to you?
It's hard to say. I mean, like you said, it was veiled in secrecy, but that is a pretty in terms of the comparison to Chadwick Boseman, I mean, it's got to be something somewhat serious if he's going to make that kind of a comparison. Unless the comparison was just you don't know what people are going through behind closed doors. If that's what he was alluding to, then maybe it's something different. But yeah, hopefully whatever it is, it's something that he can come back from. But he's, like he said, he's fought 3 times in 10 months. I mean, he's been very active. So if it was something that was going to hinder him dramatically, I don't know if he would have taken 3 fights in 10 months.
Also, just from my point of view, Aaron, it looked to me like he fought. I mean, you mentioned it. He was up 39-37. Like, I'm not here to say that his comparison is overblown. I don't have enough information to make that claim. But just based on what we saw in the octagon for 20 plus minutes, he looked pretty good. He looked pretty healthy. He looked strong. He looked like he was in good shape. So I don't want to make a claim one way or the other, but I guess I would have a little bit more comfort, just a little bit, knowing he looked as good as he did even in a losing effort. Do you share that sentiment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good way of putting it. And I just thought that early on, the way that he incorporated a lot of the different elements of MMA that weren't available to Alex in kickboxing, I thought really threw him off of his game. The hand fighting in particular, I thought, was something that really stood out in those first couple of rounds where he was grabbing the wrist, he was grabbing the gloves, he was doing things that are legal in MMA that you don't see in kickboxing to kind of show Alex, like, listen, this is a different world here. This is a different realm, and you're going to have to beat me without all of the same available tools that you had, or at least, you have to have more of the tools that make a complete mixed martial artist in order to defeat me in my world. And I thought that he outclassed Alex pretty early on in that fight. And then, like I mentioned, that power of Alex Pereira is no joke. And all it takes is one single strike to throw you off of your game. That's how powerful this guy is. And when I see all these people being like, oh, well, he's not facing guys that can take him down. Robert Whittaker would take him down and hold him there. Try getting close to this guy. Try taking him down and getting hit with elbows to the side of the head or getting hit with uppercuts. People are just completely dismissing the primary weapon of this guy just because his ground game might not be quite as refined.
I will say, what kind of stands out to me about this whole fight was that basically Alex did to Izzy what Izzy did to that division, where Izzy had this massive striking advantage basically over the rest of the division, and he could play prevent defense everywhere he needed to more or less let that reign over the course of his fights. But that didn't work against Pereira because he got one takedown of 4. That was nice. That third round one, that was pretty good. But he couldn't ever really replicate it. And so as a consequence, like Izzy forcing his opponents to stand, he kind of had to spend much more time in what do you want to call it? A risk-centric way of the place, up against the cage where there's just a shit ton of risk. And obviously Alex is the more devastating kickboxer of the two. So do you feel like Pereira kind of used Izzy's magic against him in the way that Izzy had used it against the division?
Well, if anything, he just leveled the playing field, right? I mean, Israel was such a step ahead of the competition in terms of striking that what's the thing that's going to take Israel out of his game? And maybe it's a heavy grappling approach that somebody like a Bo Nickel eventually would have taken against him. But if you take somebody who's as good of a striker or even better of a striker, because like I mentioned, I think that in terms of credentials, it doesn't get much better than Alex Pereira in terms of MMA. I think that he just kind of has found his match in terms of what he is best at. And that was going to be the thing that was the X factor in this fight and turned out to be that thing. And as much as Israel was using a lot of the different elements of MMA that took Alex out of his, primary, best path to victory, I do think that when you look at what Alex was able to do in there eventually, and just by staying in the fight, by being motivated, by knowing that his power was going to translate and that in his mind, I'm sure he felt he was the superior striker, was enough for him to continue to be a threat as the entire fight went on.
Yeah, and when you say level the playing field, you have to go back to those calf kicks by Pereira. That's the best thing you could do against somebody who moves so well with great footwork and then obviously has all-time great sublime striking work like that. I mean, we've never seen Izzy compromised like that, where if it wasn't a miscalculation of the danger that he faced, or he had to stay in the pocket because of the calf kicks putting him there, that's the best way that Pereira was able to overcome the lack of experience between them. And really, a lot of that, the technique, even though obviously what Alex Pereira does, as we just saw, is very dangerous on itself, that leveled the playing field more than anything. So, Aaron, we played up the narrative coming in of, does Pereira have Izzy's number and will that factor into this fight? Now we're likely heading to a rematch, as you mentioned, and the early odds makers that flood out those emails have Adesanya as the potential favorite in a rematch. Well, hey, he controlled that fight for 4.5 rounds before being stopped. I get that. But do you think this only adds to whatever percentage of that pie is true that Pereira is or will still be in Izzy's head? I mean, when you've beaten a guy twice, including by knockout, then you follow him into his new sport and you knock him out after losing 4+ rounds. It was literally a redo of their second kickboxing fight in how that played out. What type of mental rebuilding is Izzy going to have to do knowing that this guy's got him twice now?
Well, it's funny, and I think the odds are based on the fact that if you look at the duration of all 3 of those fights, and you were to say who is winning the majority of these fights, Israel is the clear answer. Like, Israel is winning and dictating the pace of a lot of the time of that fight. But again, it's that primary weapon of Pereira and his ability to find that left hook, no matter how much you know that it's coming. He's always able to find it. And that's what makes him, in my opinion, such a devastating fighter and such a big threat to anybody that faces him, because you know what's coming. And even though I think in terms of his matchups in the UFC, Bruno Santos fought a really good defensive game plan because he was, I think, fighting knowing that left hook was going to come out of nowhere. Even still, he's so devastating with it and so precise with it. And it comes so quickly that no matter how much you prepare for this, I think that he's always going to have that weapon at his disposal as long as a fight goes on. So even if Israel wins 4.5 rounds, you just never know if that left hook is going to be able to connect. And that's what makes this such an intriguing matchup if it happens for a 4th time. Because will Israel finally be able to get the best of him? Israel knows what's coming. Israel's a brilliant, brilliant fighter. He's got as high fight IQ as anybody that there is. But no matter how many of those intangibles you have, when Pereira has that left hand and the speed and precision in which he's able to execute with, he's just so dangerous at all times.
All right, so then let's talk about what is next. Now, you want to see the rematch, fine. But make the case for me along these lines, right? Make the case for the viewers, for us here, that the second fight between them in MMA, the 4th overall, which is crazy, but make the case that that's a better choice than booking Robert Whittaker. I know he's got to fight with Paulo Costa, but just hear me out. They could change that if they wanted to. Booking Robert Whittaker, where then Izzy gets the winner of Whittaker versus Pereira.
Well, the case that I'm making is one that's full of money, because you don't want to squander this rematch, right? I mean, that's the case. If you're a promotion, you know that that's the fight to make. I mean, everybody's going to want to see it again. I don't think anybody's going to walk into that fight being like, oh, this guy just has Israel's number. It's going to be, 4-0 for Alex. I think everybody's intrigued as ever after that fight on Saturday, because people saw that Israel had that fight. Like, it was in the palm of his hands. And all of the talk about, oh, this guy's, he can't go 5 rounds. He doesn't know what he's getting into here. Completely, that narrative's gone. It's out the window. Rip up that piece of paper and throw it away, because that's what makes this rematch a necessity. Like, I just think that unless, again, there's some sort of health ramifications here, it's the clear fight to make next.